and all that kind of thing. And so we didn't get together until our senior year, but we were really good friends for the whole time. And so it was a nice solid foundation. We got married, and a couple of years later, I went to MSU, got to know Mike, got my MFA from there in 2012, 2010, sorry. And then after that, we went up to Providence, Rhode Island for a while. I got a job at Trinity Repertory Company, which is a big, it's sort of like the Guthrie of Providence, that kind of thing. And spent a couple years working at Trinity Rep as a sound engineer. Then I was also a resident designer at Brown University for a year while I was there too. So that was a really great, and I think what kind of the underlying theme, I guess you could say, about this whole thing is not really being a professional dabbler, we'll call it that. Like, I feel like I'm not really great at one thing. Hi. Hello. I'm Benji. Thanks for coming. I don't feel like I'm like really great at one thing, but I love to try things, and I love to go in and sort of figure it out. And that really was the theme for all of this, and even the difference between undergrad at Bethany and grad school at MSU. I mean, my time at Bethany, I was the only one sort of interested in sound design and writing music for shows and this kind of thing. So because of that, you know, I got a whole lot of experience. I was the only one kind of doing it. So I got this double dose of the artistic in undergrad, and then MSU has such great technological capabilities. And that's one thing that at the time Bethany was really lacking, is the technology and some of those technical theater things. And so I got a double dose of that in grad school, along with building the artistic, and so kind of rounded me out really well. And then our few years out in Rhode Island was really great to experience that side of it. The other experience in my life that really made a huge difference was after I think it was my senior year at Bethany, I was blessed enough to win a National Sound Design Award through the Kennedy Center. And so I got to spend a week at the Kennedy Center working there, which led to an internship at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center in Waterford, Connecticut. And what they do is they are a professional summer playhouse for developing new works. And so they've got a great reputation of lots of shows that are just, you know, in the canon right now, went through the O'Neill Center. And so I was an intern there for 1 year, and then a staff member and a resident designer for 5-6 years after that. And so that's all we did, was we took these kind of baby scripts from playwrights, or not as developed as they could be scripts from playwrights that had a lot of potential, and did everything that we could from a designer's perspective or from a director's perspective or whatever to try to bring out the best of those works before they went off until their next, you know, performances or productions or publication or whatever it is. And so those years of, you know, really working with some of the most brilliant minds in new play development in the country just taught me so much in terms of, you know, how to be hungry to make new works. And so I'm not a great playwright myself. I consider myself maybe more of an adapter, and I think I'm pretty okay at adapting. I'll talk about Pete more in a second. You guys know Pete Bladel. But he is, you know, by far, you know, double the playwright I ever could be. And of course, you know, working with him for 15 years or whatever it's been, I've certainly learned a lot. And we've done, oh my gosh, Pete and I have done so much work together over the years that, you know, you kind of sponge off each other after a while. So now I teach at Bethany. I freelance when I'm not doing Bethany stuff. Kind of the big thing right now is I've been getting into writing video game music, and so I built a little recording studio in my basement, and I work with video game developers from around, and we communicate over chats and stuff on the internet and write music for video games and that kind of thing. So that's been really fun. Kind of a little freelance project. It's going to be a busy summer this year, just writing music. And into the future here, we got some fun productions coming up at Bethany that we're already working on. And then I'm going to get to work with the Mankato Symphony a whole lot more, composing music for the symphony and working with Ken Freed and some of those folks on some really fun symphony projects coming up. So I'm excited. So I guess that's sort of me in a nutshell. And really, one of the things that made it possible for us to try to develop so much new work over the last several years is our team. And I think we all kind of have this mentality of let's just make, we gotta make stuff. So we don't necessarily, let's just call it theater making. And the reason I think that's a pretty good term is that theater is really something that requires whatever is required of you that day. You never quite know exactly what you're gonna do or what you need to figure out, or just some of the crazy weird projects. Like, I don't know, we did Women of Troy a couple of years ago, and we had to make a fleet of these little puppet ships that needed to have wireless lights on them that couldn't be seen until certain, all this stuff. Like, it's like, I don't know how to do that. Let's figure it out. Let's make it. And so, like, music, let's make it. Weird set painting stuff, let's make it. I don't know, let's do it. And so, really, our team of Peter and then Emily Kimball is our costume designer, who's brilliant and a playwright herself. And so we all kind of have this really complementary shared mentality of let's just make some really cool stuff, put a lot of effort into it, and really take ownership of what we're doing. And I think that's really kind of the essence of how this all has been going down for us. So I'm going to take you through a couple of the plays. These are Bethany's originals of the last 10 years, and we'll just kind of breeze through. Has anybody seen any of our plays, by the way? Okay, awesome.
I haven't seen
great.
that one, but I've seen several.
Okay, great. This was, I feel like, the one that really sort of kicked it off. Right after I graduated from undergrad, Pete approached me. He's like, hey, I got this idea. I think it could be a musical. And after I got done freaking out for about a week, he's like, I don't know how to write a musical. And he had some songs kind of developed for guitar, and he had this kind of foundation of a script that eventually became Jamjar sonnets. And so we spent about 1.5 to 2 years developing this musical. It's the first time either of us had ever done that. And maybe some of you recognize this guy. This is Pete's son, Hans Bladel. At age, I don't know, whatever he is, they're 10. He just turned 22 today, actually, is his birthday, and so he's a graduating senior, which is a little trippy. But yeah, we did that. We spent about 1.5 years. A lot of it came during the summer where Pete and I would just kind of lock ourselves into a room and pace around and hammer out the script. Be like, well, I really feel this character could do this, and like polite professional disagreeing, which is always good, and all the stuff that kind of goes into collaborating on this script. The story itself is really nice. It's this kid named Charlie who, when he was young, he had a bunch of crazy stuff going on with his parents, and he befriended this kind of spunky girl over there, and he was selectively mute, so he didn't talk because of some of his childhood traumas that had gone on. She got him to talk, really got him to open up, and then suddenly she had to move away, and so they were separated, and then kind of the rest of the play explores, she had kind of in her teens and 20s and stuff had a bunch of really rough stuff happen in her life, and so she was sending out these poems on the inside of apple jam jars. She ended up working at this orchard and started putting these poems out into the world, which as an adult, Charlie recognized and be like, oh my gosh, she's still out there. And so the rest of the musical kind of explores him trying to find her again and reunite and see what's going on. And so it's really nice. So Jamjar did really well. It was one of our best selling plays that we ever did. And it was selected to go to the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival, regional festival. So, which at the time, we've done it a couple times since then, but when we did this first one, we had no idea what we were doing. And the set was huge, just massive set. You can kind of see it here. I mean, like, this is the whole span of our stage. This is 15 feet tall. Kids need to stand on it. These big barn doors opened up. Like, it was this, there was, I guess you can't really see it, but there's these huge metal towers on the sides, and that all had to fit into a truck and go to Kansas City. And so,
Can you explain the whole process that they go through when they're staging those productions at KCSTF?
Yeah, sure. So basically, any school that has responders come to it. So there's all these representatives we're in Region 5, which is a 7-state region, kind of Minnesota and surrounding. and these responders go, and the point is they just watch your show and then tell you what they think, just to kind of give an outsider's point of view. But then you could also elect to be considered to take your show to the conference. And so that's kind of the process that we went through, and we were selected to go, and so we were given a stage that is as close as possible to the original, but of course no two stages are the same, but ours was, I mean, we have what we call a proscenium house, which is like the big picture frame and then a little tiny bit of an apron on the front. This one was a full thrust, and so it had this big acting area in front of the picture frame, which was almost non-existent. So it was a totally different type of theater. And so it was just an engineering craze to try to do this. And so very thankfully, one of our students that was involved, her dad is an owner-operator and owns a semi-truck. And so he donated the semi-trailer and drove it down there for us. And it just barely fit in a full 53-foot semi. It was insane. So yeah, we remounted the show, and it was about not quite a year later, and so we did a couple more performances of this and then played it in Kansas City, which is really great. And then Pete, I'll come back to this too, but Pete has a little bit of a relationship at the time with Playscripts Publishing. And so they were just getting into the musical game. And so he kind of on a lark, well, not on a lark, it was intended, but he submitted Jamjar to be published, and they took it, which is really great. And so now they published our musicals, like here's the vocal scores, and then the full score if anybody wants to do it with the full orchestra. Or there's an option that we recorded the score just instrumentally, so somebody who doesn't have the band could just play the CD or however they wanted to do it and do the musical. And Jamjar's had about 20 performances since then, which is pretty cool. So we're always hoping more come down the pike, but it's really neat that it's just kind of out in the world and people have done it. So that was Jamjar. That was kind of the thing that sort of kicked off this idea. It's like, it's kind of fun. It's kind of cool to do new work. So this was the next one, just the next year. This is Child of Grace. And that one was written by Emily Kimball, who was a senior in undergrad at the time, and who's, as I mentioned, is now our costumer. And she's just so brilliant. We're so lucky to have her. And so this was a play that she wrote about a woman, the gal on the left over there, had a miscarriage, and so she's like keeping this secret with her and all the ramifications of that. And so this one I don't know as well. I've certainly read it, but this is when I was in Rhode Island, and so I didn't have as much to do with this one. But it was really great that we had this, aspiring undergrad who wrote this thing, and we were able to produce it fully, which is really great. Next was The Life Coach. This one was written by Pete, and this was a really pivotal transitional one for me too, because this was right before I got the job to come back and teach at Bethany full time. And so my job was to do the sound design and write the music for it. Life Coach is a story of a guy, who is autistic, and he's got all these kind of locked talents that nobody has ever paid attention to before, and he hasn't really talked about publicly. And so it was up to Brenda, who got to know him. She's a life coach, and so he's hired by her to kind of just help him with his life, and she discovers all these talents. And so one of his talents is he has all this great music that he's written in his head, and he scribbled some out on pages, but so she kind of unlocks that. And so my big project for that one is the joke was, it's described in the script as he wrote the greatest symphony of all time. So I was like, hey Benji, you gotta write the greatest symphony of all time. Thanks Pete, thanks, I'll do that. So the idea is, as he's describing it, we kind of get into his brain a little bit and hear the symphony. And so I actually did that while I was still in Rhode Island, and then flew back for a week to do the final rehearsals of that and implement everything, and then flew back to Rhode Island. So knowing that in a month we were going to move back to Mankato. So this was a kind of a quirky, kind of a really present one in my brain, because there was just so much going on in our life at the time. Next is Peter Pan, and this was my first that I did. And so when, obviously I didn't write Peter Pan, but when we were thinking about what shows to do, and I've always loved the story of Peter Pan, and I really wanted to produce it. However, a lot of the scripts that I had encountered were either really like kiddie, or were musicals, and I didn't really want to do a musical at that point, or just had like 40 characters in it, and it was just really convoluted. I just didn't love all of the adaptations. I probably read a dozen adaptations for Peter Pan trying to find it, and I think Pete planted the idea in my head. It's like, well, you know the story really well, why didn't you adapt it? Like, make it exactly what, you know, take all of the things that the extant adaptations are missing and fix them, you know, make it your own. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Not knowing what kind of punishment I was in for doing that. And so, yeah, so this is really my first foray into doing it. And it taught me a lot about how to adapt, and some things to, you know, that went pretty well that I can reinforce later, but probably even better, some things to do that I, you know, didn't do great at the first time and could go back and fix. So,
Can you talk a little bit about the legalities of being able to adapt or not adapt?
Yeah, sure. And so Peter Pan is an interesting story because it's actually in the public domain in the United States. Kind of a fun tidbit about Peter Pan is that it should be legally public domain in the United Kingdom where it was written. However, J.M. Barrie said in his will that all the proceeds from everything copyright related, he essentially donated his rights to the children's hospital that is right in the neighborhood in Bloomsbury where he was living when he wrote this. And so because that children's hospital is now huge and so pivotal in terms of, you know, doing things children's hospitals do, right in central London, that they extended the copyright just for Peter Pan because it feeds that hospital. And so yeah, it was public domain in the United States, which means we can kind of take the story and do whatever we want with it. But not in the UK, which is kind of fun. So that is something that, you know, if the idea isn't completely original to you, that those copyright things have to be in mind. And like I said, this was a no-brainer. We've done some things in the past where there's some guidelines on copyright that you need to change a certain amount so that it's essentially like commentary on the original, as opposed to just like taking a bunch of stuff from the original and saying it in a different way. Does that make sense, that difference? It's tricky, and it's, you know, legalese and all that stuff. We've never really gotten close to playing with what might be copyright infringement. We try to be very careful about that. But most of what we've done has either been a totally original idea or something that we know is in the public domain. Yeah, please.
How would you say that, just briefly, that this was commentary on Peter Pan then?
Sure. So essentially, it would be copyright infringement if I took a copyrighted version, say one of the published versions of this, and I just took little elements of it and kind of like made a mishmash of it without really like sort of rewriting the dialogue, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so like that's
or what was the commentary, or what was the overriding thread of the commentary that you made about the original Peter Pan?
We didn't have to do that because it was in the public domain. But like if it was,
if it wasn't.
Yeah, if it was copyrighted, you can use, it's a copyright clause called fair use, which you can take elements of copyrighted material and comment upon it, but obviously referencing the source, if that makes sense. So it'd be like, this is this copywritten work that I'm talking about, so I can use it, but I'm not claiming to have said those words myself. Yeah. So yeah, there's tricky kind of things. I'll come back to copyright a little bit when we get into Pete's crazy Seuss plays that he does, which got kind of fun and interesting. But yeah, really, really fun production. We had a great time with Peter Pan, and we got to make some fun magical. I love puppetry, so we got to make some fun magic puppets and stuff too. This was Pete's next big one, Christmas Carol. Obviously another one that's in the public domain. Charles Dickens, been dead for a long time. And so this is one that he's had in his head for years. He's wanted to do, and it kind of had the same experience as I did with Peter Pan, that all the adaptations that he was aware of, just like, oh, I really wish we could do this, and I don't really like what this one's doing, so why not make it yourself? So ours was a little different. It was a little, for lack of a better word, darker. It had some like really creepy factor, which was really fun. That, you know, kind of raised the stakes a little bit about, you know, if Scrooge actually, you know, doesn't change his ways, what does that mean for him? And kind of made it kind of a more real kind of scary thing. And the first thing that you saw in our production was a gravedigger. Like, you never think about a gravedigger in A Christmas Carol, but that's how we opened ours. So it certainly wasn't like, we weren't trying to be edgy or scary or whatever, but we just wanted to give it that little bit more of bite of you know, the ramifications of what Scrooge was doing. But we had some really fun music in there and some songs, and yeah, it was a really fun, really well-attended production too. Aboveboard. This one was written by both Pete and Emily. They wrote this one together. A lot of it in the lock ourselves in a room over summer method, and you know, you can't come out until you have a play done. But this was, the whole thing was inspired by, Emily saw a YouTube video one day of somebody, and we found out later that it was staged. It was like a little YouTube play of itself, but a person living in New York who came home to discover that there's been somebody squatting in their apartment, hiding in a cupboard. Like, they had this big utility cupboard, and someone's been living there without their permission. And she saw this video, and she's like, I want to make a play out of that. And so that's what this is this girl, Marty, has been squatting in this guy's apartment. I can't blanking on his name for whatever reason. And
David Raymond in real life.
Yeah, we have David Raymond in real life, who's been in approximately 8,000 Bethany plays. We miss David. But yeah, and then they fall in love and all that stuff. And so it was meant to be a romantic comedy, just kind of a fun, light rom-com sort of thing. Icehouse, the original version of this was actually called Icehouse Madrigals, and we did it for the first time, I think, in 2008. And so this is another thing that Pete wrote about these two guys who, his buddy retired down in Florida, but he hates it in Florida, but he's there with his sister who's kind of controlling him. And so they build this big, grand ice house in Minnesota to entice him to come back, and hilarity ensues. And so like there's like all the like goober doofy friends that are sort of along for the ride, and their wives who are, you know, like all it's the most Minnesota thing.
My friend and I sat in the first or second row, and we laughed so loud that later on we met a couple of the people from the cast and said, we remember you too.
Yeah, right, you were those guys.
It was so hilarious, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It was a riot, and so we redid it just a couple of years ago without the madrigals. The original one had some like Renaissance madrigals, singing about like mosquitoes and winter in Minnesota things, and in an effort to sort of condense the play and update it a little bit, Pete took out the madrigals and changed a couple things, and we redid it a couple of years ago, and so that one was a lot of fun too. Tell It to the Wind. This was my first time. The line is blurred a little bit of like adaptation and playwriting. So this one was mine. I wrote and directed this one, and what it is essentially is a series of vignettes that are kind of connected, that are folk tales from all over the world. These are stories that I've been sort of keeping with me, the earliest one since early high school. I saw a buddy of mine was just playing hand drums in this weird play called Arashimataro in high school. And I was like, oh, I'm bored, I'll go check it out. And it was beautiful, it was so amazing. And so I've been keeping that one sort of in my notebook for years. And so this one started with, I went and bought, it had to have been like 40 or 50 children's books of just folk tales from around the world that you see all over the place, and which my wife was psyched about because she knew those were all going to the, donated to the library when I was done, so that's good news. But then just reading all these stories, making notes, and then what the final play was is it sort of like moved through the seasons, from fall to the next fall, kind of, but more importantly, telling these just really neat folk tales from all sorts of different cultures around the world. And the other fun thing that we played with was telling them in different ways. Like this one right here, this is Coo and Shy, which the original story of it was a Native American folk tale that ultimately had a bunch of other elements that we sort of squeezed into it, but there was no dialogue. It was just music and dance or dramatic movement, and we told the whole thing just through that. There was a couple that we told just through puppetry, some through just narration, some through song, and so we tried all these different mediums of storytelling with kind of this really neat jumble of folk tales from all over the world, and so it was one of my favorites that I've ever been able to do. The year before this, I directed a show called Metamorphoses by Mary Zimmerman, which, if you've ever heard of it, it's the one with the big pool.
Is that like Kafka?
It's related to Kafka.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's more Greek myths, sort of.
Oh.
If you would take Greek myths and filter them through Kafka, sort of the Kafka mentality, you would get that Metamorphoses. And so this one in particular, MSU did it a long time ago too, but the script calls for a giant pool of water. And so we did that too, and so ours was something like we took out the first 4 rows of seats and built a 2,700 gallon pool in the Lee Theater. It was insane. But she's one of my favorite playwrights, and it's just how she describes things visually, and she brings in things like puppetry and movement and stuff into her very poetic language and stuff. I was really inspired by that and wanted to make something kind of like that, and so like that was a big thing for Tell It to the Wind as well. Yeah. Did you have a question, Mike? I'm sorry.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay, great. All right, moving forward. So this is the Women of Troy, which we did 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I guess. And so the alternate title to this is the Trojan Women, sometimes it's called either one. But this is a Greek tragedy written by Euripides. And where this one came along is that my lifelong best friend, his name is Jacob Kemfert, and we've known each other since he was in 8th grade. He's a couple years younger than me, and we've just been best buds forever. And he came from Korea, teaching English over there, to entering the seminary at Bethany. So all of a sudden we were like, back hanging out again, which was great. And he's a really great playwright himself, and he's had a bunch of work done by Merely Players and all sorts of stuff. And then he's also quite the linguist too. As part of his seminary studies, he's got to study the ancient languages and got really into Greek. And so we got to talking. It's like, oh, I'm kind of feeling doing a Greek tragedy. He's like, well, it just so happens that I'm practicing my ancient Greek, with translating Euripides. And so he was, in my opinion, like the perfect person to tackle this project with me, because a lot of translators, I think, especially ancient language translators, very much just have that almost like the mathematical side of language part of the brain, and maybe less of the artistic side of the brain, more technical, less artistic. And then adapters are like, and then you see the opposite too, where somebody who has got a very artistic side of the brain wants to translate something, and so you don't quite get the cool technicalities of the language, but a lot of art. And Jacob has both. And so he was able to filter it through both his technical language side and his artistic side, and he found things. This was another one that we read, probably 8, 9, 10, something like that, different translations and adaptations of this ancient Greek story. And of course I'm biased in saying this, but his is by far and away my favorite. Like what he discovered in the language I hadn't seen in any other translation that's out there, because he's so into it. He's so gifted with poetic language and stuff like that. And so this play, it was very beautiful, but it was a downer. It was like the most tragic tragedy that we've ever done at Bethany. It was quite heart-ripping. But it was a great academic piece to do with the students that were involved, not only for the history of it, but just also to study that kind of tragedy. And I think we ended up with something really beautiful as well. And so kind of the process for that one is Jacob translated the original ancient Greek text word for word, and then we sat down together and made an adaptation of that, because one thing that we discovered, and in any ancient Greek literature, is that there's a lot of specific references in terms of by the fountain of Pythia and the Argos and the whatever, all these locations and names and stuff that unless you're a Greek scholar, have no meaning. And we wanted to make this as accessible as possible to a modern audience, and so we adapted all that. We added some of our own poetry and some of our own things into the text to come up with it, and sort of reordered the events here too. If you're not familiar, it's very applicable to modern day too. If you're not familiar with the story, it's these women who were sort of left behind after all the men were sent off to war, the Peloponnesian War, and most of them were killed. And their Troy, the city, was conquered by the Greeks, and so like they're just left behind waiting to be sold off into slavery. And so it's basically the whole play is them waiting, wondering about what their fate is going to be. And so this is coming right on the heels of the big refugee crisis in India and Syria and stuff like that. And so we were able to do some fun talks and stuff like that, kind of equating what's going on in the world today with what happened, so many thousand years ago in ancient Greece. And so it was a really rewarding project. And something that, again, I think is very original to the world. There's a lot of versions of this play out there, but I really feel like ours was very unique, even amongst the stack of plays that already exist. This is the most recent one, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, that Pete adapted, Pete adapted with his son Hans, actually co-wrote it. And we just did this one last semester, which is crazy to think about. It seems like a lot longer than that already. But he took that old Sleepy Hollow story and then inserted a little bit of the Rip Van Winkle legend in it, and he wrote the whole thing in poetry. The entire play is rhyming couplets, which is crazy. At first, when he first pitched that to me, I was like, rhyming couplets, like, do we really want it to sound like the Seuss plays and that kind of thing? And that was kind of my concern. But when they got done, the language flowed so well. And so, not that I doubted him, but like it was definitely very different. It was a different flavor of Pete writing than I anticipated. And so it turned out really, really great. Again, very original. We did a bunch of things with, made some fun puppets that, like Gunpowder, the janky horse. We made a big puppet that somebody could actually hop on and ride across stage and stuff. And so I'll talk about music a little bit later, but this was a big one that I wrote a lot of music for too. But this one was invited by that Kennedy Center organization just a couple months ago. The festival was in Sioux Falls, and we got invited to take a scene from this one. So we got the cast back together and got to perform a little bit of it again, which is a lot of fun. And then, coming up, I'll get to that. And then just in 2 days, we're going to audition for the spring play, which we're calling Letters to Anne of Green Gables. And so that came about, and I think how this caught Mike's ear when he asked me to do this presentation too is I wrote that with a recent grad of ours, Lydia Longquist, who actually, is she not even in here? Oh my gosh, she played the lead character in Women of Troy. Her picture's not even here. Don't tell her I said that. That came about is she was in need of a senior capstone project, which all of our seniors, we try to encourage them to do some sort of big creative project to kind of like cap off their time. And she was a double English and theater major. She's a very gifted writer, an amazing actress, and really gets theater. And so she was able to sort of double up her English and theater majors, and we wrote Anne together. And so we both kind of discovered a love of the story. I grew up watching the movies and later read the books and just love Anne of Green Gables, and she kind of had the same experience. We wanted to kind of tell the story in a new light without being weird about it. Did anybody perchance see Anne with an E?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you like it?
No.
Did you liked
Yes.
it? Yeah. It got me right away, but then I sort of lost interest because it was so different from the original, which is fine, but eventually, like, I kind of felt like they were trying a little too hard to be different with the classic story. Does that make sense? And so we had to, yeah, Lydia and I had a similar kind of thing where she really liked it, and I was like, but that's one thing that we wanted to sort of not create something divisive like "and" with an E, because it's kind of fun to talk to people about that, because some people just love it, some people just loathe it, and so like it's like, how can we have the responsibility of telling such a classic, such a beloved story without creating derision? And so ultimately what, and Lydia's also very into classic literature and letter writing and stuff, and so the solution that we came up with was we're retelling the "and" stories that we all know and love via letters that were written to her as an adult that's discovered in modern times. And so the script has gone through a nightmarish amount of changes, and every time I think I'm done, somebody has an idea, and so I have to start over again. The latest idea, like the latest version of the script that we're auditioning in 2 days is about 4 days old. Just because you can't ignore a great idea when you hear it, and then you get somebody else's new perspective, and you're like, ah. So I'm really excited for the script to actually be in production. I can stop rewriting it. But it's told in a modern day context where, yeah, somebody discovers all of these letters that were written to Anne throughout her life by Merlin Matthew and Diana and all these people. And so as the modern day person is like checking out these letters, it sort of like unfolds in front of her, and we tell the story that way. And Lydia's classic letter writing is just so beautiful and so wonderfully period, and really sets up the live action really well. So that's kind of what we're doing with it. And we got 6 weeks to put it together, so we'll see what happens here. I haven't directed in a year and a half, so I'm really excited to get back to it, and we'll start next week, so that's next on the agenda. So of course our other kind of big thing that we do a lot is theater physics, which at the beginning of the year, every year, we do this crazy, weird, Pete calls it a vaudeville review, called Theater Physics, which is sort of sketch comedy, sort of short plays, sort of whatever the heck we want to do. But basically we have 2.5 weeks to create a brand new show from scratch.
Is that all the time?
That's it.
Well, because I've seen several of them.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
That's it. We start basically on day one with just like a stage full of junk, and we see what happens. Sometimes we write a little skit, sometimes we don't, who knows. The famous story that Pete always tells is 1 year before Theater Physics started, he went around Mankato and bought every single plunger that he could find. And so we had a stage full of plungers, like, we gotta make a show with plungers. And so they made like cannons and like all sorts of weird stuff with plungers. But that's kind of how it works. And so what's come out of that is Pete has a ton of one-act plays that are now published through this. And this just blows my mind. I had to write down these numbers because they're just crazy. And the biggest one I should mention is he has really made a name for himself in terms of Seussifying classic literature. And so take an old story like the one you're looking at there that we just did last year. This is the Seussification of Romeo and Juliet. So telling Romeo and Juliet in Dr. Seuss language. And he's had a lot of success of those. And so like, as of last Saturday, a couple days ago, his one-acts have had 5,872 performances. And then the biggest one is the Romeo and Juliet. And so that one by itself has 3,173 performances in 38 countries. Isn't that insane?
Wow.
And they all came from theater physics, which is kind of neat. And so like we're trying to get out there in the world and do our stuff. And we should mention that too. Like right now, Women of Troy and Tell It to the Wind are being considered for publication right now. Aboveboard is published through Play Scripts. Jamjar Sonnets is published. And then Peter Pan didn't get published. I didn't send it in for publication, but it's had several performances, including one in Canada and one in Switzerland, which are kind of fun of just people who found us via YouTube, saw the show and be like, where'd you get your script? And I was like, I have the script. You want to do my play in Switzerland? Yes, here's the script. That's so cool. So yeah, it's kind of neat to have that external connection, that we're making stuff for our kids and for our students at Bethany and our community and all that stuff, but that's actually kind of eking out into the world here and there. It's pretty fun.
Can you tell quickly about the radio play that we just did?
Sure. So just this past December. It was the Seussified Christmas Carol, right? And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, as the story went, is that there's a collection of radio personalities and people who always do like a live read of a play on the radio. And this year they picked Seussified Christmas Carol, and originally didn't realize that Pete was the author of that. And so like he caught wind of that. He's like, is Radio Mankato doing my play? And that's weird. And so like he got in touch with somebody and then ended up going and helping him out, and they all performed the play as like a live radio play.
I missed that one. Were you in that?
Yeah, I was.
I thought you were, and I missed it somehow.
The interesting thing was, I went to the first read through. That was the first time I had seen the script. And I said, oh, Pete Bladel. Pete must have contacted them, or they knew about Pete and got in touch with him about that. And then I found out about a week later that they just discovered through Pete that he lives and works here in Mankato. So Pete then came and did a couple of characters, a couple of lines each. But it was just so fun for everybody to have the author there. I think it kicked up the level of the performance, actually.
Yeah, right. And he had such a blast too. He came after that just all smiles. He had so much fun. Did I get that backstory kind of correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal.
Well, and Pete smiles a lot anyway. So.
Yeah, that's true. It all came at a very chaotic time for us, like the end of the semester and figuring out like all this stuff, and so it just like went by like a blur. But yeah, that was a really fun little surprise. So I should maybe talk a little bit about, just kind of in a nutshell, the last 10 years, that's kind of new things that we've made. I should talk a little bit about why we do it. Because somebody asked me that before. I was like, I have no idea why we do it. Because it's a lot of work. Has anybody ever read or familiar with it was a 1961 novel, and then later a 1965 Charlton Heston movie called The Agony and the Ecstasy, about Michelangelo. And I think that's the perfect way to describe this kind of thing and why you do it, because there's fewer things that are more torturous than trying to make a new work. And it's such, because there's just, it's never done. There's always something that you can do better, and all this stuff, and it's just actually quite agonizing to, there's like this big period of self-doubt and all this stuff that you have to go through. But then once your thing is finally, we'll call it done, or we'll say performed, then, there's nothing quite like that feeling either. Like all this mud that you had to muck through to get to this thing, and your kids are, your actors are having fun, and your designers are into it, your audience is into it, and that's a really cool feeling. And so it really is the agony and the ecstasy of making art. And it's not just playwriting, it's anything. It's definitely with music writing, with painting, any sort of artistic endeavor. It really is the agony and the ecstasy. And one thing I'm very appreciative of is our team at Bethany. We all very much buy into that. It's just kind of like ingrained in us, I think, that we just got to make stuff. We just got to keep moving forward. We got to make stuff. And if I think if all of us weren't sort of on board with that, we wouldn't take the extra time and effort to try to make these new things. Just because it is so much work and it's kind of crazy. But what's neat about it is that it really is starting to be an identity for us. That we're starting to run into people. I go to conferences, the Kennedy Center conference and the Tech Theater conference called USITT, and somebody else I know. I met one person in Austria who had gone to their undergrad in Wisconsin and be like, oh, Bethany, you do the plays and it was crazy, and so it's starting to be like this little niche that we're carving, which is kind of fun and exciting, and kind of, I don't know, it's very motivating, just kind of been trying to increase our awareness. And we've been really kind of focusing on the community too, which is why I'm very appreciative to come and do this thing too, is that I would say, several years ago, we just weren't that known in the community. Our department wasn't that known in the community. And there's another very big, very prominent theater company, college theater company in town. And for all good reasons. I mean, the MSU musicals and productions are wonderful, and we're all connected there. Like, we all went to grad school there. And I think we have a really great relationship with them now. It's not this competitive thing. It's like, no, you're MSU Theater, we're Bethany Theater. Let's work together. Let's like put the spotlight on theater and Mankato together, as opposed to like, you know, trying to be like, well, whatever, you guys know what I'm saying. But so we've really been trying to do that too, is just be more relevant in the community yeah. Anyway, another reason that we've kind of found ourselves wanting to do this is sort of what I mentioned before, is controlling the content. And we have another thing that Bethany is known for is we have a really fantastic media arts program and a new broadcasting major. And so kids creating video content and all the artistry that goes with there too. And so we've been able to partner up and make some really amazing live video recordings of our plays. And because we control the copyright, you know, normally if you get rights to do a play, normally you can't videotape it for any reason. But because we own everything, we own the words, we own the performance, most of the time I write the music, so we own that we can kind of send it out into the world and do whatever we want. And that's been really kind of amazing and exciting too. These are Pete's plays, by the way. I skipped over that. Don't tell him I skipped over that. Pete, or Mike, can you edit that out of your?
I will, yeah.
Just kidding. But here are all Pete's plays. But this is really quite incredible, is that Pete's kind of cutting of Hamlet. These are just both two of the recordings that are on YouTube right now, and Hamlet has 512,000 views on YouTube, and my Peter Pan has 108,000 views on YouTube, which is crazy. That's so many views, and so like that continually blows our mind that people are actually finding this stuff on YouTube and watching it.
So are you doing the full length of the play
Yes.
there?
Yep.
And is it edited, or do you have a stationary camera, or?
No, well, it kind of depends on the needs of each individual play. Normally they do it with 4 cameras, sometimes 5, and I think it's even been more. But then they take those 4 and usually tape 2 performances and then make a composite of the best of moments of everything. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And we hang a bunch of microphones to pick up decent audio and stuff, but it's a thing that I think is getting noticed, that we're putting this stuff out here. And also Bethany is contracted through the city of Mankato to run KTV TV station too. And so we have all this stuff that we own all the content, let's put it on KTV. And so that's really been kind of a fun thing for us too, is that if on our website, we probably have 10 or so full-length plays that are just embedded, the whole plays that you can just come and see, and it's really nice quality and all that stuff too. So that's another thing that's
on the Bethany website?
Yeah, yep. Our little sub-page is theater.blc.edu.
Okay.
You can spell theater either way, it'll get you there.
Okay.
And you know, that's people who were supposed to have read Hamlet 3 weeks ago
totally.
who need to.
Absolutely. That's most of the comments that end up on the pages, which we love actually, is somebody being like, oh, I'm studying for the role of, Hamlet. This really helped me. I didn't like, that's most of our comments, which is really fun. But it's just kind of neat to have something out there in the world, and we're so thankful to our media arts program and those guys for, investing in that too, because it's a lot of work for them.
And you have to do,
well.
excuse me, but you have to do it right to do it justice, I think, to the play, because
Right.
if you just do a one flat camera, I mean, sometimes to just see one flat camera doing something on a play, it isn't the same as being there. So if you're doing it with 4 cameras and different mics, I think you can probably do justice to it.
The vast majority of plays that are taped that you can see online are that. There's just the flat camera and the microphone that's built into the camera. And it's really tough to watch.
Yeah.
It's okay to kind of scroll through and get an idea, but it's sort of like they're producing all of these live musicals for TV, over the last few years, and they're just beautifully produced and really professional. And so the, modern TV watching audience is sort of used to that. And so maybe that's a way that we can stand out a little bit, is by putting out these really nice live recordings, and we don't have any copyright issues. So it's been kind of a fun thing too. Sleepy Hollow's almost done. We just put up The Importance of Being Earnest that we did last year. That just got done, and then Sleepy Hollow should be done and out pretty soon here. So yeah, it's really fun that we can do that too. I mentioned publishing. I can skip over that. That we've got some of our plays out there, and then it's really kind of been a new way that we can engage our students as well, producing these new works. Every time we write something, we often do what we call a workshop read, which we get people who won't potentially be cast in the show to come and read the draft of the script as it exists at that time. And then we invite the students to come and listen to that and then give us feedback, like be a part of the process of making this thing. And even right now, like now that there's a little bit of a culture of that and our students sort of expect, or at least anticipate that we're making new things. Like right now I'm teaching a Directing 2 class, and it's real small. I have 4 kids in there, which is great, 4 upperclassmen talking about like the nitty-gritties of directing. And I'm kind of taking them with me on this journey of making the new Anne of Green Gables play. And so frankly, like I had this big problem up at the start of the semester of a way that the play opens and closes. Like the guts of the play, the middle was really quite solid, but it's just the framework wasn't quite there. And the best idea came from bringing these 4 students along with me and just sitting in a room and talking it through, and they were so into it, and we workshopped it and we solved it, you know, like, and it was because of them and their excitement for creating new things that we really got the beginning and ending that we wanted. And so I'm excited about that too, that our students are kind of in with us. We're not just like subjecting them to like weird projects that we want to do. They're definitely bought in, and it really helps motivate us and you know, to have them to be so invested. And it really helps us to engage with them on kind of a different, cool way.
And many of the plays that are out there will have the name of the person who originated the role. So it's got to be fun for them to be listed in theater history as the person who originated a role in a production.
I give Pete grief all the time because I was in the first cast of the Seussification of Romeo and Juliet a million years ago when I was in undergrad, and so I was like, well, it's clearly because of me that this is doing so well, Pete. It's like, clearly. The worst actor on his cast, yeah. But yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. And even now, when we brought Sleepy Hollow to the Kennedy Center Festival, just a couple years ago, we brought a different play called Leveling Up to the festival. We brought the whole production, and a bunch of those students are still here, and we're in Sleepy Hollow and got recognized by other students at the festival. It's like, oh, you were, you know, Chuck in Leveling Up, that's so cool, and it's been neat for them too to sort of have that experience and just get out there a little bit more, I guess. And then, of course, the other reason that we're very interested in making these new things is the mission of the college. You know, Bethany is a Christian liberal arts college, and one thing that means for us specifically is that we want to put plays with content that go with our mission and the mission of the college out into the world too, and we want people to, you know, kind of understand that if you come to a play at Bethany, it's going to be, you know, family friendly. And I think there's a misconception over there that because we're Bethany Lutheran College, all we do is Bible plays. We've actually never done a Bible play. But we want to make sure that the plays that we are doing are consistent with the mission of the college, you know, and that whole thing. And one great way to do that is to create your own work and to be a Christian theater artist out of there. So that's a great way that we can engage with our students as well, is why we're doing that. So, let's see, some of these things I kind of talked about already. I talked about that. So let me shift gears a little bit, actually, and just briefly kind of go on the other side that really brought me into theater, which is music. So I started off as a music major and didn't really myself find a great fit with the music program at the time, because I really wanted to make what we call programmatic music, which is like music written to be paired with something else, to support some other thing. That really always is what I was into. Like, I thought I was going to be a film composer, you know, for a long time, writing music for some other things. And so I just kind of, like I mentioned before, found that niche of writing music for plays, and because nobody was doing it, it was kind of exciting. I got a ton of experience and all that stuff. So I'll go over really quickly just kind of the process of writing music for plays. I think I have, let's see, since I started keeping track on my resume, which was like 2001, 2002, something like that, I have 80-some sound, I was the sound designer for 80-some productions at this point, and probably about half of them, maybe a third of them or so, I've written original music for. So that really was my pull into theater, and something that I just love to do. Theater, why I think it's so neat and interesting, is its volatility. That theater, you go to a theater production, and it happens once in a room with that group of people, and it'll never happen again. As opposed to, and I don't mean this like at all like disparaging film, but like with film, it's like you put in your favorite movie at home so you can have something on in the background while you're vacuuming. You know what I mean? You don't do that with theater. You don't go to theater so you can have something on in the background. If you do, I want to talk to you because that's very interesting. But it's that kind of like, present volatility of theater that I think is really exciting. And then music is another level on top of that, because music is such a static medium. It's like, especially when you record music, like once you record it, it's kind of there. You press play, and it's going to take the amount of time it's going to take, and then it's done. And that's not how theater works. Like, theater is adaptive and dynamic, and if you're an actor, you have to listen to know when to say your next line or do a thing or whatever, and it never happens in exactly the same time or whatever. So it's a fun, interesting challenge of how do we get music to be an actor? How do we get music to be dynamic with the flow of the play, and all that stuff. So I'll kind of take you through that a little bit. So one thing that there are some fun technological tools that we have at our disposal to do that, and I'll demonstrate that one. One big one is this program called QLab, and what QLab is essentially iTunes for theater, for live performance. And so you can load a bunch of sound files up into this computer program and very specifically control timings and mix, and like in our Lee Theater at Bethany, we have 13 permanently installed speakers in the theater, kind of throughout and hidden up in the ceiling and stuff. And so I could, tell the computer just this one little element of music I want you to play here, this element play here at a slightly different time. So you can kind of see how the possibilities are really infinite in terms of how you can control the timing and stuff. So I want to play a little clip really quick. This is from Metamorphoses a couple years ago. There's the pool. And this is David Ramhilt and Barrett Oren, and they're going to sing you a little tune here. So, with just that little clip in mind, pause this for a second. This is what QLab looks like, and so this is the computer program that I can program and control all that stuff. And it really is a different way of writing music, because what I need to think about is how can the static time of recording music still be flexible with what's going on? If an actor comes out and trips and we lose 5 seconds, well, the music needs to respond to that, all this stuff. And so what you just heard, here, let's fire this up here. So this is the background music that they were listening to, and I wrote the music so that I don't need to time anything, I don't need to listen, and so when we're ready, we can sing that first phrase, oh, that I were a kingfisher. And then the programming just kind of morphs to whatever time. I could tie my shoe, I could go out and get a snack, I could go, whatever, and then when I'm ready to come back to it, we can move on to the next chord. This one could be really fast. Oh, no, now we're ready for the next one. And so it's that kind of idea of writing music a little differently to respond to that dynamic environment. So that's kind of like the basics of what I'm thinking about. So I can illustrate it a little bit better with Women of Troy. And so Women of Troy is the first play that I was able to write music for that I really wanted to put this idea of dynamic and adaptive music in the forefront while still being pre-recorded. And so this was just a picture of putting it together, so I wrote all the scores, and then some of you might recognize Ken Freed over there playing viola. This is Sharon Rogers playing cello. This is the Bethany Mary Martha chorus. There was 23 of them, 23 ladies, and I recorded them doing their parts twice, so it sounded like a chorus double that size, essentially. We recorded in what was formerly Two Fish Studios here in Mankato, which is now sadly not there anymore. Yeah, we just, over an afternoon, went and recorded all that stuff. And took a couple different strategies with it. So the first kind of, and it was a blend of all of these things. So you don't need to read music. If you don't read music, don't worry about it. But this is kind of, the first idea is just something that's through composed, which just essentially means we just record it and then the actors either have to listen to it or respond to the music, because the music isn't going to change. It's just straight up through composed. And so like this, what you're hearing here is the beginning of the show. And it was very through composed, and I wanted to sort of choreograph the actors with the drive of the music as opposed to the opposite. Does that make sense? So that was the first way. The next way is by doing through composed sections. You can fire this up here. And so what I would do was essentially, especially for Women of Troy, which is, any sort of ancient Greek thing is like a huge monologue, and then a little bit of talking, and then a huge monologue. And so you're dealing with just these huge blocks of text and breaking those down into thoughts. And so like maybe these 4 lines are a thought, maybe these next 8 lines are a thought. And then I can compose music sort of the same way in thoughts, where I know these 4 lines are going to take 12 seconds. I know these 8 lines are going to take 40 seconds. So compose to these individual thoughts, and then compose some kind of like glue, some kind of musical glue, or essentially that ties them together. Does that make sense? And so like to an audience's perspective, you're not really aware of the glue. You just hear this musical thought with this dialogue, and then when the actor's ready, you fire the next section that goes with that thought. So the music is always kind of ideologically keeping up with what the actors do.
So you're there actively watching the actors so that you can make the changes?
So during rehearsal, yes.
Okay.
But then by the time we perform, that's in the hands of the stage manager and the board operator.
Oh, okay.
But by that time, yeah.
A human being is watching
Yes,
the actors
yep.
so that the music, if they trip or
Yeah,
something,
exactly,
changes.
exactly. And I've sort of tortured some of our stage managers in the past that, like in Women of Troy, there was like a big long 1.5-page monologue at the end that I really wanted the music to follow. The pace and the energy of the monologue is really roller coastery, so I wanted the music to do the same. So in a 1.5-page monologue, I think she had 32 music cues.
Oh, wow.
And so like on this word, and by the time you rehearse it a couple times, it's okay, because you're just waiting for this word, which triggers it, which takes a little bit for the computer to sort of like, so the audience doesn't notice morph into the next thing, but the music is always adapting and changing according to that pace.
Well, music has such a strong emotional, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes a big difference.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's a very cinematic approach, of doing this, of bringing this like really nice, high quality recorded music and plugging it into theater is something people just don't expect. It just doesn't happen very often.
Plus, speaking of not happening very often, a stage manager who gets to be a part of the production, performance, because that is very much a part that people don't appreciate. And for that, because I did Merely Players one time, a light, and it was Dancing at Lunasa, and it was a matter of you watched the actor on stage, and as they reached a certain point, the lights went down or the lights went up. Some stage manager would probably be scared by that, but others would just relish the opportunity.
That's one of the first things I like to tell our new stage managers, is that this is an artistic position. You are living and breathing and acting with the actors, just nobody can see you. So like if you're not breathing with them, and if you're not pacing yourselves like them, you're gonna feel that disjointedness. And so it is very highly artistic thing. So kind of the third technique that I brought into that was this idea of aleatory. So aleatory being, like if a musician is given aleatoric music, it means like, okay, I want you to play anything within a range. And so like, I'll give you 5 notes. You can play any one of those 5 notes as loud or as soft or fast or slow as you want to, just stick with the 5 notes, have at it, do your thing. And so like, kind of the best example is like horror music, when you get that like screechy spider strings way up, that's aleatoric, because the composer just said, pick any one of these 7 notes, play it at any time, however you want to, and so you get that kind of random thing. And so we did that in this play too, that our chorus of women learned these lines. This was also recorded probably 3 or 4 times with the recorded chorus. This is what it sounds like in the recording. Maybe. So that's what that sounds like. And then on stage with the actors singing the same lines, but in different rhythms and at different times, coming in at different times. So you get this kind of swirly blend of cool sound that can really help transition into the next thing. There was another moment at the end. There's Lydia, by the way. I knew I had a picture of Lydia in there. This is what the end of the show sounded like. And so you hear Ken and Sharon there playing away. And then at the end, the soldiers kept telling the women as they're marching them off, you must go. So that came with a 3-note motif that you're going to hear in a second here. It's just, you must go. And so every time we hear that musical, you must go, the soldiers are shouting that at the women while they're making sounds and singing other things, and it just became this like kind of speech music-y thing that also helps the music stay dynamic and kind of living and breathing at the moment. What's happening? Also apparently going to play like 19 things at a time. The other kind of aspect to this is, because like I said, I'm really interested in, we've done some really fun live music on stage, and that is a really good time. But I think most interested in what I'm talking to you guys about is just this, how do you make recorded music that sounds really good, you know, live in the theater world? And the other key to that is kind of this mixture of real instruments and virtual instruments. You heard the choir and the cello and the viola in the previous recording, and those were all real, but everything else was computer generated. Were these things called samples, which is basically like you take a recording of an instrument, somebody is paid to play like every note on every technique of every instrument, and then you can sort of recall that on a computer to sort of virtually mock up an orchestra, if you will. And so I think this is a little trailer I made for Sleepy Hollow last semester that is a good example of that. So what you're going to hear is the cello is real, and that's Sharon Rogers, and the percussion is real. Those things I played in my studio at home, but everything else is virtual, is a sample. So again, the idea is sort of blending those real, you know, nothing can replace, you know, as far as technology will keep advancing, nothing will ever be able to replace a live, breathing musician, ever. Computer will never be able to do it as well, because part of what makes, you know, a live musician sound like a live musician is mistakes, frankly, like imperfections. That's why an orchestra sounds like an orchestra together, because it's 80 different people playing slightly imperfectly to make that sound, and that's the sound that we know and love. Computers are perfect every time. And so if you blend kind of that live sort of feeling with these very perfect computer instruments and kind of blend them, you know, and stuff, you don't really notice the computeriness of it sometimes. And so like that's another tool that we have at our disposal is you know, maybe making something, you know, like I said, I mean, it's just me and Sharon recording things, and then I can make a whole big orchestra sound with this virtual stuff, and trying to blend them so that it doesn't hit the ear in a weird mechanical way, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that's just kind of a little blurb on the music side of things. And I'm not writing music for Anne. I was going to, and then all of a sudden we had a senior who was really into it, so we're going to have a student score for Anne, which is really exciting. But then I should be writing for the next 2 plays next year once we figure out what the heck those are going to be, and all that stuff. But really has been my bread and butter in theater is this music thing. It's been really fun to kind of explore and find new ways to do things in a live environment. That you know, I've just been very blessed that I have this palette, you know, of Bethany theater that I can try this stuff on, and it's turned out pretty good. So that's sort of it, I think, what I was going to talk about. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts? Or
I have the same question for you as I thought about when I looked at Pete Blado, obviously his last name. Do you guys ever sleep when you're creating something? It's like, how does so much creativity come out? You know, it's great. I mean, I think I'm a fairly creative person.
Sure.
But some people are just, it's like, have it in spades, and it's wonderful.
It's a struggle sometimes. Pete and I operate very differently too. In terms, Pete's very like in the moment kind of guy, where he'll just like, and I'm exaggerating, but he'll like stay up for a week straight, like just, you know, kind of making things out. And I like to start early and regiment. So we kind of approach it sort of differently, but it's kind of crazy sometimes. And then work always comes in waves too. Like when I'm supposed to be getting a play done, and I've got 2 video game projects, and I'm starting a play here, like that's all going to happen at once. It can't like friendly space itself out. That never happens. So yeah, I don't know. I guess you just sort of find different ways to keep yourself sane and distract yourself. And
I understand.